Okay, a couple of terms that I'll bring up now. We'll talk about in several different chapters that we will go through are resources and reserves. You might want to make just a little side note on this. A resource is all the stuff that's out in nature. So if you're talking about gold resources, it's all the golds that are out there, all the gold. That's resources. Now, not all of the gold that's out in nature is profitable to mine. Not all gold that you can find out in the real world is considered to be an ore deposit. Some of it's just not profitable. It's not in a great enough quantity so you could extract it out of the ground and sell it and make a profit. So a resource is any amount of a usable item that exists out in nature. Some of that will be profitable, some of that will be not profitable at any given point in time. A reserve is kind of a subset of resources. It's that subset that can be extracted for profit. In other words, reserves are ore deposits. And it's something I think really worth noting. It's something I'm going to bring up several times this semester. A lot of folks in the media get this wrong a lot. They're always talking about reserves. A lot of times they're not talking about it correctly. Sometimes they're talking about resources when they mean reserves. Sometimes they're talking about reserves when they mean resources. So it's a confusing set of terms that not everybody understands. So think of resources being a big circle that includes everything you can find in nature. So let's say this big circle represents all the oil in the world. So these are the resources. Are some of those resources going to be profitable? Yeah, if this is oil, some oil is profitable, but some oil is not profitable, right? So there's some smaller amount in here that we consider reserves. What happens as we tap our reserves? Start taking oil out of the ground. What happens to the size of this circle? Starts to get smaller, right? What about reserves? What determines the size of the amount of reserves? What is a reserve? Something profitable, right? So let's say you woke up tomorrow and somebody came up with a really cheap alternative for oil. Super cheap alternative. And you all want to use that instead of oil. What does that do to the profitability of oil?
Goes way down.
Goes way down. So you might wake up tomorrow and you might have, that might be your reserves. Might be just a very small amount out in nature that would be profitable. But what if you woke up the next day and they found some new use for oil and suddenly everybody wanted it again? Then more of it's going to be profitable, right? So my point is that the reserves will sort of shrink and swell depending on profitability. The more you use that, the resources might start to dwindle. But remember, there's an awful lot of resources out in the earth. The earth is a big place. And just to kind of illustrate that, I'm going to put up a little chart for you here. So over on the left, we have the resource, something like aluminum or gold or silver. And in the first column, we have the number of years that those reserves at that point in time would last. In 1992, and then in the second column back in 1984. So let me give you an example. Let's look at aluminum. Back in 1984, based on the profitability of aluminum at that time, if we kept using aluminum at that rate, worldwide it would last about 200 to 300 years. Eight years later, we only have 219 years worth of aluminum. So in 8 years, we lost 63 years worth of reserves. There's a couple ways you could explain that. One is that we added roughly 1 billion people and they used up a bunch of stuff, right? Or alternatively, it could mean that there's just less reserves because they're not as profitable anymore. So it's kind of a confusing term. Just based on what you're given there, you wouldn't know. You just know that, hey, there's less reserves, there's less profitable aluminum. Either that means that we used a bunch up, or aluminum just isn't as profitable anymore because we're recycling more of it. Copper. 1984, we used copper for a lot of things. 1992, a lot of those things we used to use copper for, we found alternatives. The profitability of copper went down. So we had far fewer reserves in 1992 than we did in 1984. We probably didn't extract half of the world's copper during that time. It's just less profitable. Iron, same thing. Gold, silver. You can see in every case between 1984 and 1992, the lifetime of reserves dropped a lot. And the main reason is mostly prices went down because we had more supply. This seems to fit with what the boomsters were saying all along. But how long can this trend keep up? So as I said before, we're doing a good job as humans with getting the resources that we need, switching to new resources when we start to run low on something. We're doing a good job right now of keeping ahead of the problems that 7 billion people pose. We're not keeping ahead on all problems. There certainly are population-induced problems out there that are plaguing part of the world, but just in terms of getting the resources, we're able to do that right now. We're pretty good at digging stuff out of the earth. We've been doing it a long time, and we've managed to come up with new ideas to make it cheaper and more efficient. Okay, those numbers, some of which were decades, some of them were hundreds of years. All assume that we will use these resources at the rate we will in 1992. That's not really likely. Population is increasing. Countries are becoming more mechanized. But at the same time, we're using less of these as we come up with better and better ideas. So there's pressure to use more from increasing population and mechanization. And there's pressure to use less from our new technological advances. The thing I want you to remember, and I've talked about it a few times ago, is that if we ever really do start to run out of a resource, if it gets scarce, if the supply drops, but the demand stays high because we have all these people in developing parts of the world, that's going to force prices up. So resources that weren't listed as a reserve at one point in time will suddenly become reserves, similar to what I drew over there. That inner circle grows as the price goes up. So again, the bottom line is we're not going to run out of anything. That just isn't going to happen. I am not aware of a single mine that shut because they had completely run out of anything. They ran out of profitable stuff. I know of no gold mine where you can go that is closed and look around and find no gold. You can find gold there. It's just not profitable to mine it. We have lots of oil and gas in the ground. Right now prices are really low. So a lot of it isn't profitable. So it will stay in the ground until it does become profitable. So again, what it comes down to is, can our ideas keep up with the problems that increased population will cause? And that's the big question for the future. If you're a boomster, you believe, yeah, we're going to keep thinking ourselves out of problems that we create. And if you're a doomster, you're probably saying to yourself, at some point, we're going to come across a population-induced problem that we can't solve fast enough. I'd like you to remember, too, that you live in a country with a lifestyle that demands that we go to other countries for the resources to support that lifestyle. So take a look. These are our reserves here in the United States of various things. What if we couldn't go to other countries for these resources? Then what? We either have to do without them, right? Or we have to mine them here, and we don't have a lot of it here, as you can tell by some of these numbers. We don't have a lot of these resources. So what would happen to the price? Get really expensive if we couldn't rely on other countries for all that stuff we want, right? So that's something to think about as you listen to economists, scientists, especially politicians this fall talking about how they want to deal with other countries. That's all something to consider. So if we're not on friendly terms with other countries, then we have to get our resources here. That means we're going to have more mining here. It means we'll have more jobs here. It also means we'll have more of the mining-induced problems here too, such as pollution. It's likely that stuff would be more expensive. So we'd have to come up with better and better ideas to try to keep the cost down. Or we can try to have better and better diplomacy with other countries that we may not be on good terms with, in the hopes that we can keep purchasing their resources for cheap. The other thing that's going to happen, and we've already started talking about this, and we're going to talk a lot about it when we talk about oil, is that if we continue to have issues with countries that we import stuff from, especially with oil, because again, where's a lot of our oil coming from? Countries we're on shaky political terms with, right? Well, if we don't purchase oil from the Middle East and we're forced to go it alone, we have oil here in the U.S. Some of it's here in Weld County. Some of it's in the Dakotas. Some of it is on protected lands. Our national parks. You might have heard of ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It's a place up in Alaska. It's protected land. It was set aside by President Carter back in the 1970s, but it has about 11 billion barrels of oil on it that currently oil companies are not allowed to go after because the land is protected. What if we were not able to import oil from the Middle East tomorrow? Let's say we had a big spat with a lot of the countries over there and they decided, one, either not to sell us the oil, or two, we decided not to buy the oil. Is there going to be a lot of pressure to drill on those protected lands? Because what's going to happen to the price of gas here in the U.S. if we can't get it from the Middle East? It's going to skyrocket. So there's going to be a big push to drill on places that are currently protected. And they're protected for a reason. They're protected because we collectively believe that they're special and important, and we don't want to degrade them. But if things get really expensive, a lot of folks might say, yeah, this place up in Alaska that I've never visited and I will never get to visit, it's just not important to me. I'd rather have cheaper gas. So that is also a consequence if we do poorly in the diplomacy department with our elected officials. Recycling, we're getting better at this. The technology still isn't great. We're still better at just digging stuff out of the ground and creating goods with it than we are with taking things that we've already processed and turning them back into something else. It seems stunning to me that it's cheaper to take aluminum out of rock and make a can out of it than it is to take a can and make another can out of it. But it is. But at some point, somebody may have ideas that allow us to do this cheaper, more efficiently, and we may get to the point where taking materials that we've already mined and recycling them is cheaper than mining them. Like I said, we do a good job with a couple of different elements. Most of our lead comes from recycling, almost half of our copper comes from recycling. Yeah?
Can lead pipes from homes be recycled into lead to be used again?
I don't know, because my guess is that they're not pure lead.
Yeah.
I don't know much about the chemistry of the pipes. I'm guessing it's an alloy, which means it's a mixture of lead and other metals. So you would have to take it through a process that would separate the lead from everything else that's in it. That can certainly be done.
Not as profitable.
At this point, it's obviously comparable because most of our lead does come from that. I don't know if it comes from pipes directly. My guess is it does, but I don't know for certain. The other thing you could do, you really could do this, and so could everybody else in the world, you could stop using so much crap. You could, but you're not gonna, are you? And all those people in developing countries, do they want to use less stuff? No, they want more stuff. So it's a great idea. I urge you to conserve, but I'm not dumb. I know people aren't really going to do this unless economics forces them to. Any questions, comments? It's not an easy topic. I hope I've confused you a little bit. That's my point. These are not simple questions to answer. Okay, bottom line, here's the summary. The Earth is a big place. We have lots of stuff. Our deepest mine barely scratches the surface. What we lack is not stuff. We lack the ability to get it out of the ground cheaply. We lack the ability to recycle things cheaply. So what we are running out of is the easily obtainable stuff. But every year we figure out new things. We figure out how to get stuff out of the ground a little cheaper. Stuff that wasn't profitable to mine last year might be profitable to mine next year because of somebody's new idea. And so far we're doing a decent job of finding enough resources for the world. It's not without its costs, though. We have pollution problems in part of the developing world because that's where a lot of the mining takes place. You look at the air quality in China, it's horrid because they are trying to build their infrastructure. They're trying to mine, they're trying to extract resources, but it takes energy. That energy also comes out of the ground too. And here's something, especially with this fun political season that we have upon us, is that a lot of that stuff that's sitting in front of you, your pencils, your pens, your computers, the cars you drive, all rely heavily on imported goods. We have to stay on good terms with these countries if we want their stuff. But don't forget, your hard-earned money goes to these other countries. It's not making jobs here. It's making jobs there. It's making them more powerful. We could mine all that stuff here, but it'd be more expensive. You'd have to pay for it. So do you want to pay more for your goods? Keep the money here? Keep the jobs here? Or do you want inexpensive goods? Do you want to be able to buy more stuff with your money? If so, the cost is that we do business with countries that don't like us, and we ship our money and our jobs elsewhere. It's not easy, is it? Or you could stop using so much stuff. Okay, one final little chapter related to this. I think this is kind of interesting. It's really different. It's very non-geologic. It has to do with law. Mining law. Mining law is super complex. I'm not going to teach you an entire course on mining law. I'm going to spend half a class period and give you just the basics. But what you will find is that mining law a lot of times has very little to do with mining. The very first law that we had in the United States of any consequence when it comes to mining was something called the 1872 Mining Law. If you're a political junkie, you will hear about this today. (1872), that's the year it was passed. What was the U.S. like in 1872? We've been a country for about 100 years, right? Where are most people living? In the East, right? And in fact, earlier in the 1800s, and then a little bit later, the United States grew in land areas substantially because of two purchases. We got most of the western U.S. in the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 from France. And then in the mid-1800s, we got a lot of our northern land from Russia in the Alaska Purchase. So we had acquired enough land that we more than doubled the size of our country. Why did we do that? Why would, if everybody's living in the East, why do we want all this land? Stuff. It's all about the stuff. Yeah, we acquired this land because we knew our population would grow, and we knew that there'd be stuff on it that we could extract, sell, create jobs, create wealth, create power. That wealth could help build our country. We were a new country. So we acquired all this land. Who lived on this land that we acquired? Mostly the native people. You did have some folks from the U.S. who lived in the East going west. Why were people going west? what kind of people went west? Pioneer. Who were the pioneers? Who are likely to be think of it this way. Everybody's living in the East, right? If you have it good in the East, you pull up all your crap and move out west?
Well, no.
No, you're not. For a couple reasons. One is that the West was harsh. The West had people living on it already. And those people sometimes got into difficulty with some of the pioneers who were moving. Why would you risk your life to move west if you had it good in the East?
Maybe it wasn't so good.
Maybe it wasn't so good. So the people who were pioneers were the ones who didn't have it so great. They were risking life and limb to go west and try to get resources. And at first there really weren't many. What happened in the 1840s in the West?
Gold rush.
The gold rush. Yeah, somebody discovered gold. And then more people discovered gold. So there was gold out there. And in fact, what this law was not really about mining at all. It was to get people to move west and develop the resources that were there. So it was to encourage westward movement and to get people to move in, extract the resources, make our country strong and great. And this was a great law if you were a pioneer. What it said is that you could mine on public land. And at that point, basically the entire western U.S. and Alaska was public land. It was owned by the government. Government purchased it from Russia and France. But they really wanted to get it into the hands of the people. That way they could tax it, make more money for the government, and get those people to extract the resources that they could also tax. Makes the government stronger, provides jobs for people. Some people have suggested that this was actually one of our first laws pertaining to Native Americans. Because the idea kind of underlying all this was we had these folks on our land now who didn't want to live the way that we live. They had a different conception of time. They just lived differently. And this was a way to get them moving along, for right or for wrong. So we signed treaties with these folks, not in their native language, in our language, and we just sort of kept moving them farther and farther and confining them to smaller and smaller spaces. So this law says, young man, young woman, go west. There's stuff out there. You can mine it and you don't have to pay us for it. You can mine it and you don't have to clean up your mess. The West is a big place. Nobody's out there yet. Go dig up some gold, silver, lead, whatever you think you can dig up and sell it. Keep the money. After you've extracted it, move on. Find another place. You don't have to clean up your mess. We'll worry about that later. And what's even better, if you want, after you've worked the land for 10 years or so, extracted the resources off it, we want you then to own it for the huge price of $2.50 to $5 an acre. Now this was a law of 1872, but it was actually the law of the land and still is today. This is still the law in many places. The problem was that in the early 1900s, some people were kind of abusing this law. They really didn't want to extract any resources. The land was what they really wanted. So developers became miners. What they would do is they would claim some land in places like Aspen, Vail, Beaver Creek, Steamboat Springs. And for 10 years, they push around some dirt. They couldn't care less about mining. What did they want? Yeah, how would you like to have an acre of land in Aspen for $2.50? Think you could make a little money? Yeah, you can make millions being a miner and finding nothing. Because at the end, you buy the land for $2.50 to $5 an acre and you sell it for millions. So this was being abused by developers badly. So in 1984, we put a moratorium on patenting any new land. But for basically 100 years, that's how the federal government got land in the public's hands. It doesn't provide for recreation or multiple use on this land. If you claim it, you can actually keep people off your land. So this law, would this encourage, if you were a down and out Easterner, just couldn't make a go of it. You're trying farming, you're trying everything. You're just living poor and barely hanging on. Might this entice you to go west? It might, and it did. And this law helped settle the western U.S. It helped make our country stronger. People were able to make money. People were able to make a living. They were able to sell this. We then taxed their income. Little cities were set up all over the West to support the mining industry. We pushed Native Americans into a smaller place. Now, back in the 1970s, mostly because of the coal miners in the eastern U.S. destroying areas that a lot of people could see. Remember, most people lived in the east. A lot of coal mine was occurring in Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. They were strip mining, which was a very damaging type of mining activity. Basically, they just removed the tops of mountains to get at a coal seam. They were decapitating mountains in the east, and people were saying, you know, this is impacting tourism. It's impacting our water. So in 1977, coal, oil, and natural gas were subjected to a new law that I'll talk about in a second. But to minerals, this is still the law of the land today. Although, and you should know this, each state can impose additional laws, and every state does. Some states are highly restrictive with their mining. It's almost impossible to open a mine in California. They have so many environmental regulations that miners will say, you know, it's just easier if I go to Alaska or Nevada. Those are two states that have the most lax environmental laws. We're going to go there because it's not going to cost us as much to mine. Colorado's kind of in the middle. We still have laws that make mining attractive enough so that we have some mining, but we also have some environmental regulations that keep some investors out. We had a mine in South Dakota that was fined, I think they were fined $80,000 one year because of ducks. If you've ever been to a gold mine operation, they have lots of ponds. You need water for gold mining. So they set up these ponds, and one of the ponds was wastewater, and they had cyanide in it. Cyanide and living organisms is a bad combination. Cyanide's very toxic. So they had this cyanide-laced water, and 8 ducks landed on it. 8 ducks died. So environmentalists were able to successfully sue the mining company for violating the Federal Migratory Bird Act. It's the same law that if you're a hunter and you shoot a duck out of season, you can get a $10,000 fine. Instead, they used it on the mining companies to fine them for killing ducks. So now the mining companies adjusted by putting nets over the water and trying to keep the animals out. I had a student who worked up there, and he was just hired to do odd jobs, and ducks are flying around and they see water, and even if there's a net over the water, they'll try to get in, and 2 ducks did manage to get onto the pond, and the mining company told my former student, take a boat and go get those damn ducks off the water before they die and cost us $20,000. So he's out there in a boat trying to shoo the ducks off the water, and that was his job at the mining company. So other laws can impact mining as well. Now, obviously that previous law I put up is really good if you are pro-mining. You don't have to pay for the resources, you don't have to clean up your mess, you get to keep the land when you're done. Obviously, people who want a clean environment are not going to be happy with the law because it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't go really far at all. It doesn't force anybody to clean up. Multiple use advocates, sportsmen, mountain bikers, rafters, people who just like to hike don't like it either because miners can tie up big tracts of public land. That land is yours. So I said this before, talked about this a little last class, about how mining really works. In a minute we'll talk about this 1977 law that oil, gas, and coal have to follow. But the minerals industry, gold mines, they don't have to follow this more restrictive law. And people ask why? Why would you have a law that just pertains to oil, coal, and gas and leave off the metals mines like gold, silver, lead? How come they have different laws than the coal miners do? Well, one thing that the gold mines were able to argue is that they were really, really weak, and that if you put new laws on them, you would kill their business. So think about this. The price of gold fluctuates wildly compared to oil, coal, natural gas. I've seen gold in the last 20 years as low as, I think, $210 an ounce, and as high as $2,000 an ounce. Right now, I think it's sitting somewhere between $1,300 and $1,400 an ounce. I haven't checked in the last few days, But what the gold mining company said is that if you put these more restrictive rules on us, these more environmentally friendly rules, you're going to kill our industry here in the United States. You're going to completely kill it. And here's what their argument said. Okay. The price of gold fluctuates tremendously. $200 to $2,000 an ounce, all over the place. And it takes about 2 years to get a gold mine up and running. So pretend I'm a geologist, okay? I go around on public land, I find some gold. I stake my claim. I do my little tests, I see how much gold is there. I'm just a small-time geologist. Do I have the money to start up a gold mine? No. Where am I going to get the money? I got to go to investors, right? You guys are the investors. You have money. You want to make more money with your money. That's what an investor does. Takes their money, makes more money with it. And I'm saying to you, I want some of your investment money for my gold mine. And you'll say, okay, tell me about it. And I said, well, I can make a profit if gold is $1,000 an ounce. It'll cost me $1,000 an ounce to get the gold out of the ground. And they'll say, what's the price of gold today? And I'll say, it's almost $1,400 an ounce. You're going to make $400 on every ounce of gold I take out of the ground. And I have X amount of gold, so it's worth millions. Sounding good, right? But they know I can't mine it today. It's going to take me a couple years. I got to get permits. Okay, I got to get a workforce. I got to get equipment. I got to get this all set up. It's going to take me at least 2 years to get my mine up and running. Then you're going to ask, well, how much does gold vary? And I said, well, it's been as low as 200 and as high as 2,000. I have no idea what it's going to be 2 years from now. Couldn't tell you. You like it as much now as an idea? What if I also said, well, but this mine is going to be in Colorado. And Colorado demands a bond of $20 million. A bond is simply some money that you have to give the state in case you pollute it. Then they have some money to clean up your mess. Oh, I have to have 20 million right from the start. Can you give me that? You'll get it back when we close the mine and clean it up. Is that how you want to use your 20 million bucks? So it's getting more and more difficult because of these laws, right? Let's say my brother, who's also a geologist, comes to you and says, I have a gold mine in Mexico. I can make a profit on any gold that's worth more than $600 an ounce. And I don't need any bond. And I don't have to clean up the mess when I'm done. And because of permitting, I can get that mine up and running in 6 months. Who are you going to invest in? And what now if you add a whole bunch of new laws to it? You're going to make it even more difficult, right? So Congress decided we're not going to include gold mines in this. We're just going to do it for oil, coal, and natural gas. Because it's already difficult to attract investors because it's a risky business because of the way the gold prices fluctuate. And it's going to be even more difficult if you have to pay the government royalties or clean up your mess. So they decided we're not going to impose these more restrictive laws just in case they really do impact the metals industry adversely. We want to mine some here in the United States. We don't want to send all of our mining to other countries for the reasons we talked about earlier. Send our jobs there, send our money there. But we don't want to pollute the heck out of our country either. So it's always this balancing act. Okay, this new law, this will be the last one we talk about, is called the 1977 Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. It's for oil, coal, and natural gas. This was signed 1977. Okay, think back. You guys weren't alive, but what was the political climate like? Anybody remember 1977, what was going on in the country?
I like the counterculture at Nixon.
Nixon had just a couple years earlier resigned, and then Carter and Democrats were kind of swept into office after the whole debacle with Nixon and the Republicans. So the Democrats were in office, and they saw it as an opportunity to pass some environmental laws that they had long wanted to pass. And this was one of them. And this is a very environmentally friendly law. It says you can mine. You can mine a mountain. You can mine a valley. You can mine anywhere you want. But guess what? If there was a mountain there when you started mining, there's going to be a mountain there when you're done. Same size and shape. They have to go out, they have to make a topographic map of the area they're going to mine before they mine it, and when they're done, it has to be exactly the same. That is not easy to do. If you have a cliff, you got to have a cliff there at the end. But what mining companies have to work with once their mine is ending is a bunch of crushed rock. It's hard to make a cliff face out of crushed rock. Just because you enact a law doesn't mean that mining companies can always follow it. Not only do you have to return the land to its pre-mine surface, you also have to restore the hydrology. If there was a lake there before, there's going to be a lake there after. If there was a stream there, there's going to be a stream there after, and it better have the same water flow. If there was an aquifer there, a rock unit that stores water, there better be an aquifer there when you're done. Again, that is not easy to do. You have to pay royalties. You can't just take this stuff that the US citizens collectively own and keep all the money from it. You have to share with all of the citizens of the US who actually own that land. No more patenting lands. You don't get to buy the land when you're done. So developers not liking this idea either. Now in some areas this works great. I don't know how many of you have been up to the Gillette, Wyoming area. That area is amazing. First of all, it's pretty flat, so it's kind of easy to put back the pre-mine topography. Second, there's not a lot of water there. It's pretty dry, so they don't have to worry much about lakes and streams and aquifers. The other thing too is that it's kind of a cool operation. Their mine sort of moves across the countryside. At the front, they sort of dig up the front of it. They move the waste rock to the side. They take the coal out. And in the back, they take all the waste rock and they move it and they repair it. So at the back of the mine, they're repairing, and at the front of the mine, they're digging it up. So the mine just sort of goes across country. And 2 or 3 years after they repair the land, you wouldn't even know that mine was there. They've replanted native grasses. The antelope and the deer are back. You go there, it's pretty spectacular. The mines hire biologists, they hire plant scientists, they hire wildlife people. But it's a pretty easy place to do it because the topography and the hydrology are not challenging. If you had to do that in the eastern US or up in the Rockies, it'd be a lot harder. That's not a great picture. You can find these on the internet, but it's just kind of a nice deal. They extract the rock out, put the waste rock in the back, and that area that doesn't look so great there, a couple years later, looks like the grassland it was before. Do you guys like the idea of repairing land? Most people do. Do you think that's something we should make mines do? Why do mines close?
Because it stops being profitable.
So there's still stuff there, right? So if you repair the land, you're basically putting rock back over stuff not profitable today, right? Could it be profitable next week?
A few years maybe.
It could be in a few years, right? Now that stuff's profitable again. But now you have to, in order to get it, what do you have to do?
Dig everything up again.
You have to dig up everything you just spent millions of dollars repairing. So it's a good idea, but sometimes, and then you have to put in all this extra cost to dig up all the stuff you put back in. So it costs you money to repair it, and it's going to cost you money to dig it back up before you can even get to the stuff. So that just made your stuff more expensive, didn't it? So there's certainly some advantages to reclamation. One is appearance. Why is it important to have land that looks good, that isn't ugly mining stuff? other than just aesthetics, because we like things to look natural, is there an economic reason why we would want areas to appear nice?
Property value?
Property values, tourism. Yeah, it's funny, in the Black Hills of South Dakota, they have a law that says all the mining companies collectively can only mine 5,000 acres at a time. The mining companies hated that. They said, well, what if the price of gold goes up and we could make tons of money and provide tons of jobs? You're just going to artificially cap it at 5,000 acres. The environmentalists hated it. They said, well, right now they're only mining 1,200 acres. They could expand by 4 times under this law. So everybody hated this law, which to me says they probably got it right. You know, why would they say 5,000 acres? Why this arbitrary number? Well, it had to do with tourism. They felt that that was the maximum size the mines could impact without negatively impacting tourism. So they didn't want one industry to negatively impact another. So appearance actually has an economic value that goes with it. Another advantage, better water quality and safety. An ability for multiple use. Once you're done with the mine, people can go in and use that land. So there's a mine, looks like a mine. You got your machinery, you got your bare rock, you have all your vegetation stripped away. That's what it looked like 18 months later. What area do you like better?
One on the right.
Sure. But that mine closed because they ran out of profitable material. What if the price of gold doubled? Then that land again is profitable. And if they want to dig it up, they're going to go dig up all that hard work. And all that money they put in to reclaim it is essentially wasted. So should we make them reclaim right away? Should we let them have a few years before we make them reclaim? Those are all questions that are really hard to ask and answer. So disadvantages, obviously the cost. I found this figure in a newspaper sometime. One small gold mine, I think this was in Nevada, it cost them $37 million to reclaim it. So that cost the mining company a fair chunk of change and its investors. It's nice it provided jobs. All those people who worked on the reclamation got paid. But it's difficult to attract investors when you have to take $37 million of your potential profit and clean up your mess. This is something I said earlier. Just because you enact a law doesn't mean that the mining companies can follow it. You can say, put back a mountain. But when all you have to work with is the crushed rock that's left over from your mining operations, you might not be able to do that. And even if you do, crushed rock does not have much strength. It's very weak. It's prone to landslides. I saw a mine company, this again was in the Black Hills of South Dakota. They spent 2 years reclaiming a really steep area on the side of a stream. Trucked in all this waste rock, resculpted the land, planted new grass and trees. 2 years later, they had a historic rainfall, washed everything away, and had to start all over. They had good intentions, but in the end, they just made a huge mess. Sometimes stuff doesn't fit. You know, the first aspect of the 1977 law is to restore an area to pre-mine topography. If you have a mountain, you need a mountain the exact same size when you're done. The problem is that if you take rock out of the ground, if you take down the mountain and crush it and try to put that material back, it doesn't fit. because crushed rock takes up a lot more space than solid rock. So you put this mountain back of crushed rock and then you got 30% left over. What the heck do you do with it? Again, just because you make a law doesn't mean that people can follow it. And then this is the one we were talking about, is that it makes future mining more difficult and expensive because mines shut down for economic reasons. And in fact, some people have argued that making a mine reclaim its land might result in even more environmental damage than if you had just left the hole in the ground. And the argument is this, is that the mine shut down because the material that was left wasn't profitable. But if the prices go up, then that land might be profitable again. Or now because you filled it in and you got to spend all this money to dig it back up, that area over there that you've never mined before might actually be now more profitable than the one that you put all the material back into. If you had just left it a hole, you'd just be able to go back in and start mining. Now because you cleaned it up, somebody's going to go over to a new pristine area and start digging it up there rather than continuing operations where you were. So again, it's well intentioned, and I think mines should clean up their land, but I'm under no illusions that on occasion it might not be the best course of action. And then there's this. And this is not an easy question to deal with or answer. We all want a good environment here at home. We want clean water. We want clean air. We want public lands to be safe. We want public lands to be used by all. So the tendency is to get really aggressive and say, mining companies, you have to be super clean. You have to be super safe. Of course we want that. But what if we put so many restrictions on mines that they just elect to go to other countries and mine there? Other countries that may have no environmental regulations. Then don't you actually create more damage than keeping them here and regulating them some? Because the fact is what's going to happen to the demand for resources as we go on? They're still going to be there, right? We have a growing population who wants stuff. So you've done nothing to curb the demand. So the companies are still going to go where they can make a profit. And sometimes that profit will be in part of the developing world where they don't have any environmental regulations at all. So by having overly aggressive environmental legislation here in the US, we might actually create more environmental damage by pushing companies into countries where they don't have to do anything. They don't have to treat the workers right. They don't have to treat the environment right.